Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a stubborn Georgia farmer refuses to bow to a power-hungry HOA, a quiet land war explodes into sabotage, arson, and courtroom chaos. Armed with grit, cameras, and a damn good lawyer, Jacob Maynard won't just defend his land, he'll burn their empire to the ground. My name's Jacob Maynard, and I don't take kindly to people telling me how to live on land that's been in my family longer than the HOA president next door has been alive. I grew up on this farm, 220 acres of real Georgia soil, passed down from my grandfather to my father, and now to me. It's not some picturesque, Instagrammable vineyard or overpriced organic alpaca ranch. It's a real working farm with sweat in the soil, rust on the gates, and history in the nails. My granddad built it up from nothing back in the 1950s, and we've kept it running ever since. Livestock, tool sheds, grain silos, irrigation lines, hell, even an old wooden water tower we haven't used in decades, but I never had the heart to take down. When I left my job as a federal fire inspector 5 years ago, I came back here with a plan. Not just to keep the land, but to protect it. I'd seen what unchecked bureaucracy and bad planning could do to rural properties. Fires, land theft, zoning schemes, forced annexations. You name it, I've watched it all unfold. So I upgraded everything. Installed motion sensors, smart cameras, high-grade water tanks, a backup diesel pump system, and infrared perimeter lights. I wasn't just restoring a family farm, I was fortifying it. For the first few years, everything was quiet, peaceful, just me, the land, a couple of farmhands, and the hum of equipment at dawn. Until last summer, when they started pouring concrete less than a mile from my eastern fence line. I didn't think much of it at first, thought maybe it was just a road repair or temporary construction. But within 3 months, there were roof lines peeking over the treetops and rows of synthetic green lawns rolled out like someone was building a movie set. That's when I first heard the name, Maple Run Valley, a planned community. 80 identical homes with picket fences, pastel shutters, and zero soul, gated entrances, imported grass, and a homeowners association that called itself the heart of modern rural living. Every square foot designed to make city people feel like they had escaped into the country without ever actually touching dirt. At first, I kept to myself, figured they'd stay on their side of the fence and I'd stay on mine. But then came the emails. The first one was phrased all polite. Dear neighbor, we'd like to invite you to a Maple Run Valley HOA orientation for properties in the surrounding jurisdiction. Blah, blah. I hit delete. A week later, a letter arrived, then another. By the third envelope, the tone had changed. Failure to register your property with the Maple Run Valley Homeowners Association may result in penalties and enforced compliance per Section 2.1 of our regional covenants. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off the porch. Then, one August morning, I saw a white Lexus SUV creeping up my long gravel drive. That thing didn't belong anywhere near a working farm. Sure enough, out steps a woman in tennis shoes so clean they squeaked, holding a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. Short blonde bob, stiff smile, that telltale HOA aura of forced friendliness and absolute control. With her was some guy in a suit, mid-30s, slicked back hair, legal briefcase. No soul. You must be Mr. Maynard, she said, striding up like she owned the dirt she was walking on. I'm Karen Dumont, president of the Maple Run Valley Homeowners Association, and this is our legal representative, Mr. Conway. We're here to deliver your welcome packet and discuss the formalization of your inclusion in our HOA. I raised an eyebrow and leaned on my shovel. You're standing on private land, not part of your little suburb. Not interested. Karen gave a tight smile like she'd practiced it in a mirror for years. Oh, I think you'll find that the new development plan places your property well within the HOA influence zone. According to updated jurisdictional maps filed last quarter. I don't care what map you drew in your conference room, I interrupted. This farm's been here since 1952. You folks came here last year. I didn't sign a damn thing, and you don't have jurisdiction over a square inch of my fence. The lawyer stepped forward, already reaching for a folder. Legally speaking, there may be implied easement clauses and cooperative zoning agreements tied to the recent county updates. It would be best if we just... I cut him off with a single finger pointed back at the drive. Turn around. Get off my property. Now. Karen blinked, clearly unused to being dismissed. Mr. Maynard, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. As a member, I am not a member, and I never will be. You can write that down and staple it to your fancy folder. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked back to the barn, letting the silence speak for itself. A minute later, I heard the crunch of tires retreating over gravel. By sundown, I had posted laminated signs on every access point: private property, no HOA access, no trespassing. I sent a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA's office via certified mail, CC'd the county recorder, and even included GPS-tagged images of my property line with a copy of the 1976 deed and grandfather's zoning exclusion clause. I wasn't playing nice anymore. I figured they'd back off after that. Most HOA types love their paperwork, so when I dropped notarized documents, historical deeds, and county maps on their doorstep, I thought that'd be the end of it. But I underestimated just how far these people were willing to go to pretend they ran the world. Within a week, things got weird. The first sign was subtle. One of my neighbors from across the road, Nancy Weller, sweet lady, makes killer peach cobbler, came by with a confused look on her face and a HOA flyer in hand. "Jake," she said, "I thought you said you weren't part of this HOA thing." "I'm not," I said flatly. "Well, that's strange. This came in the mail. Says you are." She handed it over. On the front was a photo of my barn, badly cropped and filtered to make it look like some apocalyptic dump site. Below it, the caption read, "Newly integrated properties may require aesthetic updates to meet community beauty standards." Below that, my name, my address, as if I had voluntarily signed up to be part of their Stepford suburbia. My phone started buzzing with calls from other neighbors who'd seen the same thing. Apparently, Maple Run Valley had published an updated property list in their community bulletin, naming my farm as a new member parcel. No legal basis. No consent, just printed it as fact. That same week, a couple I didn't recognize knocked on my door and asked if they could tour the property, since it was now part of the development. I told them they had 5 seconds to vacate before I introduced them to my not-so-friendly cattle, dog Remy. But it didn't stop there. I started finding leaflets taped to my mailbox, demands to repaint non-neutral structures, requests to remove unsightly industrial elements from public view. One even demanded I dismantle the rusted water tower to reduce skyline disruption. The water tower had been here since the Kennedy administration. If anything, it was a landmark. But apparently, it clashed with Maple Run's beige vinyl siding. Then the real harassment began. Late one night, I was heading in from the fields when I noticed my front gate hanging open. I always lock it at dusk. Always. But the chain had been cut clean through. Bolt cutters, judging by the precision. I rolled the footage back on my security cams. Sure enough, 2 figures in hoodies walking the perimeter, shining flashlights around like they were shopping for trouble. I reported it to the sheriff's department. They logged it, shrugged, and said without positive IDs or plates, there wasn't much they could do. I upgraded the locks, reinforced the gate, and added a second motion light near the west fence. The next morning, my truck's front tire was flat. Not a puncture, shredded. I found a handful of roofing nails and screws scattered right along the drive. Deliberate placement. It wasn't just kids messing around. Someone was trying to slow me down, or worse. 3 days later, I got a letter on faux official county letterhead claiming I was in violation of County Fire Code 9.2.14, something about unmanaged drive vegetation presenting risk to adjacent communities. That might have scared off someone else, but I'd written half that code when I worked for the feds. And guess what? There is no 9.214. It was a fake. The signature, Chief F.D. Harper, Fire Safety Division. Problem was, the actual county fire chief was named Elena Dawson and had been for over 10 years. I called her directly. "Jacob," she said, "you're absolutely not under any citation, and if someone forged my department's identity, I want their ass." That made 2 of us. At this point, it was clear this wasn't just a passive-aggressive paper war. It was coordinated, targeted pressure to force me to either comply or give up. And I don't do either, so I pushed back. I contacted the county registrar, filed a formal affidavit stating that no jurisdictional changes had been approved over my parcel, and requested an investigation into fraudulent HOA claims. I backed it up with maps, recordings, and copies of the forged documents. Then I upgraded. I had my electrician buddy come by and help me install a surveillance tower, mobile-mounted, solar-powered, with rotating floodlights, thermal imaging, and a high decibel siren tied to motion triggers. Looked like something you'd see on a prison perimeter. That was the point. If they were going to try and intimidate me, I was going to make them regret stepping foot on my land. Just to drive the message home, I added a new sign beneath the others at the gate. Private property. Not part of any HO. Enter at your own damn risk. I could practically feel the HOA fuming from across the tree line. Let them. By the start of September, my farm looked less like a pastoral retreat and more like a military outpost. But that's what happens when someone pushes you too far. You adapt, you fortify, you take back control. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. After the incident with the forged fire citation and the gate breach, I decided to escalate on my end. I wasn't going to let some suburban dictator with a clipboard push me off land that had belonged to my family for nearly 3 generations. So I called in backup, not the kind with guns, but the kind with legal degrees. Her name was Kelly Graham. Former county judge, now a private real estate attorney with a sharp tongue and zero patience for bullshit. I sent her every piece of documentation I had. The deed, zoning records, scanned letters, security footage, timestamps, even the forged citation. Within 24 hours, she had already drafted 2 separate filings. The first was a formal declaration of jurisdictional independence, complete with exhibits proving my land was exempt from any HOA oversight, past, present, or imaginary. She had it notarized and submitted to the county clerk, the zoning board, and the office of the district attorney. The second was a cease and desist letter addressed directly to Maple Run Valley, demanding immediate cessation of harassment, misrepresentation, and physical trespass. We even attached the footage of the gate vandals and the image of the fake fire department letterhead. That should have been the nail in the coffin. But HOA people are like wasps. You swat one and 10 more show up angry. So I leaned all the way in. I bought a mobile surveillance trailer like the ones used by Highway Patrol, elevated mast, solar panels, cellular uplink. I parked it near the front entrance of the farm next to the old pecan grove. From there, it had full visibility of the eastern tree line and the main drive. The motion sensors were dialed in to trigger floodlights and an audible alarm if anything bigger than a raccoon stepped into the zone after dark. I wasn't just guarding my property. I was collecting evidence, building a case. Kelly and I also sent out a request to the county property office to flag any attempted filings involving my land, in case Maple Run tried some sneaky bureaucratic maneuver. While we waited, I spent days reviewing old blueprints and land surveys, making sure there weren't any weird loopholes, easements, right-of-ways, utility overlays. Nothing. My property line was clean, legally armored, and etched in documents dating back to when Elvis was still skinny. Meanwhile, Maple Run ramped up their campaign. A local Facebook group popped up, Keep Tilt County Clean, filled with photos of my grain silos, my livestock pens, and snide comments like, some people think the rules don't apply to them. A few posts were anonymous, but others were clearly written by HOA members, one even by a woman who had never set foot outside her subdivision and thought a tractor was some kind of rural lawnmower. It was stupid, yes, but also dangerous. Propaganda has a way of turning cowards into vigilantes. So I took another step. I hosted an open farm day for my immediate neighbors, not the Maple Run types, but the folks who'd lived here for years, like the Weatherlys, the Sings, and Miss Franklin from the feed store. I showed them the security footage, the forged letters, and the ridiculous demands from the HOA. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I wanted them to see the playbook. I needed allies who understood what was coming. And sure enough, one of them delivered. It was old Mr. Dunley, retired surveyor, lived 3 parcels down. He came by the next day with a dusty folder in hand, original plat maps from the 1970s, showing clearly that Maple Run's eastern boundary ended nearly 300 feet before my fence line. The HOA was lying, blatantly. Their claims of jurisdiction were built on fantasy. That was when I knew for sure. This wasn't about neighborhood harmony or aesthetic standards. This was a power grab. An attempt to absorb my land through pressure, deceit, and harassment. Kelly filed an affidavit of land autonomy, her term, and submitted it to the county attorney general's office. It was formal, forceful, and backed by a stack of evidence thicker than a cinder block. Just to make things crystal clear, I updated the sign at the front gate. Now it read, "Private property not subject to any HO. Do not cross this line." In red beneath it, "Trespassers will be documented. Repeat offenders will be prosecuted." I added a motion-activated speaker that played a pre-recorded message whenever someone approached the entrance after dark. It simply said, "You are being recorded. This is private farmland, not part of any HOA. Leave immediately." I knew it sounded extreme, but I also knew what was coming. You don't build pressure like this unless you're planning to light a fuse. And the fuse had already been set. It happened just after 2:47 in the morning. The shriek of the thermal alarm cut through the night like a banshee, jolting me out of bed before I even realized I was awake. A second later, the motion floodlights outside the west silo flared to life, lighting up the darkness like midday. I grabbed my phone and opened the live feed from the tower cam. The screen went white with glare, then adjusted, and that's when I saw them. Two figures dressed in dark clothes and hoods were inside the perimeter. One of them was moving fast toward the storage barn, the other toward the back of the equipment shed. Then came the flash, small at first, just a glow in the lower left of the screen. But within seconds, it blossomed into full flame, licking up the old timber like it was paper. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed the fire radio, hit the direct line to the county dispatch, and yelled into it. "This is Jacob Maynard, 1118 South Creek Road. Structure fire. Multiple ignition points. Suspected arson. Repeat. Suspected arson." I didn't wait for confirmation. I was already in my jeans, boots on, sprinting across the yard with a fire extinguisher in one hand and my backup thermal camera in the other. The flames were visible from halfway down the drive, not just a single blaze, two separate fires, one at each end of the barn, which meant one thing: intentional. By the time I got close enough to see clearly, the west wall of the storage building was fully engulfed. I could hear the popping of paint cans, the screech of hot metal, and the low roar of oxygen being devoured. The flames danced across the roofline, licking toward the old cedar rafters like they'd been waiting for this. I aimed the extinguisher at the smaller blaze in the equipment lean-to and sprayed it down as best I could, but it was like throwing snowballs into a volcano. The fire had already taken root. I fell back, coughing, the heat slamming into me like a brick wall. That's when the first fire engine arrived. The sirens cut through the trees, and the gravel cracked under the tires of a big red pumper from Station 3. The firefighters didn't ask questions. They leapt out, uncoiled hoses, and hit the flames with high-pressure foam. The second truck rolled in less than a minute later. It took 11 minutes total for them to knock the fire down to manageable levels. But the damage was done. The rear half of the barn had collapsed inward. The grain elevator was scorched and slumped. The old workbench my father built when I was 10, gone. Burned to ash along with the backup tools, fencing materials, and a 3-year stockpile of seed. One of the firefighters, Hernandez, I think, approached me with soot on his helmet and a grim look on his face. "We're looking at least 2 origin points," he said. "One by the fuel caddy, another in the northwest hayloft. No lightning, no electrical. You got cameras on this side?" "Had," I muttered. "Both were ripped out last night, cleaned right off the mounts." He nodded. "Then I'm filing this as suspicious. Fire marshal will be out by first light." I spent the next 2 hours walking the grounds with a flashlight and a growing knot in my chest. The intruders had cut through the north fence, a narrow spot behind the pine trees, and slipped in under cover of darkness. They knew where to hit. They'd picked the right spots, the right materials, the right timing. It wasn't random. It was surgical. And they damn sure didn't come for fun. At dawn, the fire marshal, Elena Dawson, arrived in person. I handed her a mug of black coffee, and she got right to work. Within 10 minutes, she was shaking her head. "This is arson," she said flatly. "Simultaneous ignition, clear accelerant use, and deliberate destruction of property with no attempt to mask it. They weren't hiding. They were sending a message." We checked the other camera towers. The east side cam caught a brief flash, tail lights disappearing into the trees. I enhanced the frame and my gut dropped. A circular white sticker on the back windshield, too blurry for details but unmistakable in shape. It was the same emblem used on Maple Run Valley HOA welcome packets. I said nothing, just walked away before I smashed the damn monitor. At 9 that morning, I sat with Kelly in her office. She'd already seen the preliminary reports. The fire, the camera data, the witness statements. Her jaw was clenched like she was chewing nails. "This isn't vandalism," she said. "This is domestic sabotage. If we connect this to the HOA, hell, even just Karen, we can take it federal." "I want a full suit," I said. civil and criminal. I want every name involved, every board member, anyone who had a hand in this." She nodded, already drafting documents. "Start compiling damages," she said. "We're going to war." I'd been through hell before. Combat zones made of smoke and flame, buildings turned to ash, lives shattered by heat and stupidity. But watching half my family's legacy smolder in the Georgia sun hit different. I wasn't just angry, I was weaponized. Kelly didn't waste a second. That same day, she filed 2 sets of paperwork: a criminal complaint for arson and malicious destruction of property, and a civil suit seeking $6 million in damages, $4 million for structural loss, and the rest for emotional distress and punitive penalties. The names on the complaint: Maple Run Valley HOA and its acting president, Karen Dumont. Personally, individually. We weren't playing anymore. The sheriff's office assigned a detective, Robinson, mid-40s, ex-military, sharp as a tack. He met me out at the property within 48 hours, walked the grounds with a fire investigator, and reviewed the footage, including the tail light capture from the surveillance trailer. "That sticker's a start," he said. "It's not much, but combined with the location and motive, we can build on it." He took the footage, the photos of the tire marks in the pine mulch, and the prints found on the cut section of the north fence. Said he'd loop in the DA's office and get a warrant to pull traffic camera data from the rural access roads. I wasn't idle while he worked. I canvassed the few non-HOA neighbors who lived near the East Access Trail. One of them, an older guy named Rufus, said he saw a dark SUV creeping down the dirt lane around 2:30 the morning of the fire. Said he didn't think much of it at the time, just figured it was someone drunk or lost. But when I showed him a photo of Karen's Lexus with the HOA sticker, he got real quiet. "That looks damn close," he muttered. "Ain't saying it's hers, but it sure ain't unfamiliar." Kelly took a sworn statement that afternoon. It wasn't smoking gun evidence, but it added weight. Then came the big one. A county records clerk, we'll call her Janine, called Kelly discreetly, said she had something we might want to see. We met her at a diner off Highway 9. She pulled out a scanned PDF and slid it across the table like it was contraband. It was a Maple Run HOA meeting transcript, not public, not shared on their website, but submitted accidentally to the county archive as part of a zoning expansion request. The transcript included a section where Karen reportedly said, and I quote, "If he won't join us voluntarily, then perhaps he needs to understand what a liability his setup is." Fires happen. Old barns go up like tinder. Kelly stared at the line for a full minute, her eyes dark as coal. "She's finished," she whispered. We immediately attached the document to both the civil and criminal cases as Exhibit A. But it wasn't just about paper now. I wanted to know what kind of sociopaths I was really dealing with, so I started digging into the HOA itself. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the county for all past complaints, legal disputes, and planning submissions tied to Maple Run. What I found was ugly. 3 years ago, Karen was vice president of a different HOA 2 counties over. That neighborhood collapsed under a flurry of lawsuits after she tried to forcibly annex adjacent private land. 2 homeowners had sued, one had been hospitalized after a mysterious shed fire, and the entire HOA was dissolved after a judge ruled its board acted outside the law. Karen had simply moved on, reinvented herself, and built Maple Run from scratch. Pattern of behavior: try printed playbook. Meanwhile, the local news got wind of the fire. A young journalist named Sam Delaney came out to the property to take photos of the damage. I gave him the whole story. The flyers, the forged letter, the footage, the lawsuit. The next morning, Channel 6 aired the headline, "Farmer versus HOA, Fire Fraud and the Fight for Private Land." That blew the lid off. Emails started flooding in. Residents from other counties who'd fought with HOAs. Legal experts offering amicus briefs. Even a former HOA board member who said, "I know Karen, and I've got receipts." Kelly forwarded everything to the DA and began compiling a comprehensive case file, complete with statements, media coverage, and prior history. She submitted a request for a temporary injunction against Maple Run Valley to prevent any contact with me or access to adjacent land. It was granted. I doubled my cameras, upgraded the sirens, and installed a new drone surveillance rig with motion sensors and automated patrol. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. Not anymore. Karen didn't fold. She doubled down. The day after our injunction was granted, Maple Run filed a countersuit. accusing me of slander, obstruction of community development, and, believe it or not, willful environmental negligence. They even claimed I'd staged the fire for insurance. Money. The irony nearly made me laugh if I hadn't just buried a lifetime of tools and machinery in a pile of soot. Kelly wasn't surprised. She said this was typical HOA litigation strategy. Overwhelm the target, confuse the court, muddy the narrative. But she was ready. She filed a motion to dismiss the countersuit with prejudice, citing malicious intent and ongoing criminal investigation. And while we waited for the hearing, the real battle kicked off. It started in the press. Maple Run issued a community safety statement to their residents, claiming the fire on my property was under investigation as an internal hazard caused by outdated agricultural practices and that the HOA was cooperating fully with fire authorities. The letter didn't mention the lawsuit, or the forged documents, or the surveillance footage. Then they got creative. An anonymous op-ed showed up in the Tilt County Herald, written by a supposed concerned parent who claimed that my farm was an ongoing safety risk to children and families and a relic of outdated land use that no longer fits modern residential zoning. The article didn't include my name, but it described my land down to the damn irrigation pump. I knew exactly who wrote it, but the slander wasn't limited to paper. One morning, I woke to find my front fence spray-painted with the words "Community Menace" in block red letters. My mailbox had been smashed in. Again. I replaced it with a steel one bolted into a concrete footing. The next day, someone left a bag of cow manure with a note stuck in it that read, "You stink up our view." Cute. But things turned darker when I noticed a black SUV idling across the road every evening around sundown. No plates, no movement, just watching. I sent the drone up once, circled it, took pictures. The next day, it was gone. Kelly brought it to the judge's attention during the preliminary hearing. She argued the HOA's countersuit wasn't just baseless, it was part of a deliberate campaign of intimidation. The judge agreed. He froze the countersuit, pending resolution of the criminal complaint, and granted us a protective order preventing any HOA member or representative from coming within 100 feet of my property. That's when the pressure started coming from another direction. A slick young HOA attorney, Mason Clark, barely out of law school, started giving interviews. "We're defending community values," he'd say into the mic. "This isn't about one man. It's about modern planning versus rural neglect," I fired back. Channel 6 ran a new story, this time with drone footage of the burned barn and an on-camera segment of me walking the property line with a measuring tape, overlaying maps that proved Maple Run had no legal claim. We included the HOA meeting transcript where Karen joked about tinderbox barns. The public response turned. By week's end, a petition was circulating online. Dissolve Maple Run Valley HOA. Over 4,000 signatures. People were waking up. But Karen wasn't done. An email leak surfaced. Someone inside the HOA had forwarded internal documents to Kelly anonymously. The contents: a strategy memo outlining ways to exert pressure on adjacent non-member properties, including property value shaming, controlled aesthetic messaging, and, most damning of all, targeted regulatory escalation. That last one was a sanitized way of saying call in fake violations and code complaints. The leak exploded across local media. Channel 8 ran a segment titled "The HOA Playbook When Neighborhoods Go to War." Karen tried damage control. She called a press conference flanked by HOA board members and claimed it was a miscommunication of internal brainstorming and that no real actions were taken. But it was too late. Kelly filed a motion to admit the memo into evidence. The court accepted. The DA followed with a subpoena for HOA board communications over the last 6 months, and for the first time, I saw fear on Karen's face. The days of neighborhood politics were over. We were deep in the legal kill zone now, and she'd brought a clipboard to a damn artillery fight. It took 12 days in court to dismantle the monster they'd built. We opened strong. Kelly called the fire marshal as our first witness. Elena Dawson took the stand and laid it all out. 2 distinct ignition points, accelerants used, 0 signs of electrical failure, and, most damning, the deliberate disabling of security cameras before the fire. She paused just long enough before saying, "This was not accidental. This was arson." Then came the video footage, my surveillance trailer's time-stamped recording of the black SUV exiting the property minutes after the fire ignited. The enlarged still with the HOA sticker drew a low murmur from the crowd. The defense objected, of course, claimed unverified vehicle identification. Judge overruled. Karen sat stone-faced through most of it, but her jaw clenched when we brought out the internal meeting transcript, the one where she joked about old barns going up like tinder. That alone might have been circumstantial, if not for what came next. Kelly called Mr. Dunley, our 74-year-old retired surveyor who calmly walked the court through his map archives. He explained, in no uncertain terms, that the HOA had never possessed jurisdiction over my land, that their claims of boundary integration were fraudulent, and that he'd seen the same tactic attempted by Karen in her previous HOA, the one that no longer exists. And then it got personal. Rufus took the stand, confirmed the SUV sighting, gave a clear description, and identified Karen's vehicle from a photo lineup. It wasn't direct proof she was behind the wheel, but it was close enough to shake the jury. The turning point came halfway through week 2. Kelly called the whistleblower, the anonymous HOA member who had leaked the internal documents. She agreed to testify under seal. The court permitted her to appear as Jane Doe, citing safety concerns. Her testimony devastating. She confirmed that Karen had not only known about the fire in advance, but had also used HOA funds to hire a consultant to help resolve the Maynard situation. That consultant, she claimed, had suggested aggressive options. The courtroom went silent. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to paint her as disgruntled, but Jane Doe held firm. She described meetings where Karen pressured the board to apply community standards creatively to outside properties. She showed emails, names, dates. By the time the defense finally called Karen to the stand, she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her lawyer led her gently through her background, real estate, community planning, blah, blah. But when Kelly stepped up for cross, it all unraveled. Kelly asked about the forged fire citation. Karen claimed ignorance. Kelly pulled out the county's official complaint log, showing that the false report had come from a burner email tied to a server in Maple Run's community center. Then Kelly asked about the SUV. Karen deflected. Kelly presented gas station footage of Karen filling up that exact vehicle the night of the fire. Same outfit, same sticker, same timestamp. Then came the final nail. Kelly brought out the HOA strategy memo, the one referencing targeted regulatory escalation and controlled pressure. She asked Karen directly, "Did you authorize this document?" Karen paused too long. "I may have reviewed a draft. That's not what I asked," Kelly snapped. "Did you authorize it?" Karen's lawyer objected. Overruled. Karen stammered. "It was just ideas. We never actually—" "But you approved it," Kelly cut in. "And people carried it out. And now my client's barn is ash." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. 2 days later, the verdict came down. Karen Dumont, guilty of criminal conspiracy, fraud, trespassing, and contributing to intentional arson. 2 other HOA board members, guilty of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Karen was sentenced to 18 years in state prison. The others got 10 and 6 years, respectively. Maple Run Valley HOA was ordered to disband, its assets liquidated to cover damages. The civil suit concluded with the court awarding me $6 million in total, $4 million for property loss, $1.5 million for emotional harm, and $500,000 in punitive damages to deter future abuse of community authority. The sheriff served the seizure order that same evening. HOA banners came down like battle flags. Karen was led out of the courtroom in cuffs, her mouth tight and eyes hollow. I didn't smile. Not then. I just watched her go, and I finally exhaled. It took almost 2 years to rebuild what they tried to destroy in one night. Insurance covered some of the basics, structural repairs, partial equipment replacement, but most of the money came from the court-ordered damages. $6 million didn't bring back the exact beams my grandfather had cut or the smell of that old wood shop, but it did give me something else. Freedom. I didn't just rebuild. I evolved. I took the bones of the old barn and raised a new one, stronger, smarter, made of fire-resistant composite, equipped with the kind of security systems usually reserved for federal buildings. I upgraded the irrigation system, installed solar power, and automated half the daily operations. But the real change wasn't the infrastructure, it was the purpose. I partnered with the local university's agricultural department and turned part of the property into an educational center, a space where students and young farmers could learn not just how to grow food, but how to protect what's theirs. We started offering weekend workshops on independent land ownership, zoning defense, rural fire safety, and yes, how to keep HOAs off your damn lawn. The first class filled up in 48 hours. By spring, we had over 200 visitors from across the state, some traveling in from as far as North Carolina and Alabama. I watched them walk the fields I'd once nearly lost, saw the way they looked at the land, not with pity, but respect. The county board even passed a new ordinance in response to the case, Private Agricultural Sovereignty Act. It explicitly protects long-standing rural properties from future HOA absorption attempts. They named the clause after me. I didn't ask for that, but I won't lie. It felt good. Karen, she appealed twice. Both were denied. Her name's become something of a warning around here. New homeowners in the region now ask, half joking, "This isn't a Karen HOA, is it?" The answer is always no. Not anymore. Maple Run Valley is gone. The lots were sold off individually. Some folks stayed and turned their cookie-cutter houses into real homes. Others moved out the moment the news broke. The fancy white fences are still there in some places, but they're starting to fade, weather, soften. The edge is gone. I still keep the signs up at my front gate, not because I expect trouble, but as a reminder. Private farm since 1952. HOA free, trespass and burn. You'll learn. People take selfies with it now. Some laugh, some nod in solemn agreement. As for me, I still wake up at dawn, still walk the perimeter, still fix what breaks with my own two hands. But now, when I look out over the fields, I don't just see land, I see proof that when you stand your ground, when you fight with everything you've got, not just to survive, but to defend what's right, sometimes the land fights back with you.